Assalamu alaikum. Hello, Adabers. I'm Binish Ahmed. Welcome to Azaadi Now. Azaadi in Kashmiri means liberation and freedom. This is a show where we talk about current affairs in Kashmir with guests who shed light on what's happening and decolonial resurgence by indigenous people globally. Today, our guest is Mirza Saaib Beg. Mirza is a Kashmiri lawyer, a Kofi Annan and Wildenfield Hoffman Scholar, and a candidate of public policy at the Balvnik School of Government at Oxford University. He's a gold medalist graduate and a former student union president at Nationalist University of Law. He's practiced law for over 6 years in India and is currently based in the UK. Mirza regularly contributes to seminars, writings, and efforts aimed at dialogue on legal and political issues on Kashmir. Welcome to Azaadi Now, Mirza. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Let's start by talking about the new domicile law that has been introduced by the Indian government. Can you tell us what this law is?
Well, I think to put it in brief, it's just a fast track way for Indians to get access to rights in Kashmir. Because until now, non Kashmiris, that is Indians, did not have rights of employment in Kashmir for the most government jobs, nor did they have certain privileges which are reserved for only Kashmiri citizens, or as they are popularly called, state subjects of Kashmir. And on that point, the term state subject is not really a legal term anymore. It used to be a legal term in 1927, which is when the Maharaja had issued a proclamation defining who a subject of the state is. And there were certain privileges reserved for those subjects. In that sense, Kashmir had defined its boundaries as well as its citizenry in 1927, when even most of Europe had not defined the boundary, and many parts in Europe did not have citizenship also at that time. So we had already done that, but this part of our history it has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because we also see the Maharaja as an illegitimate ruler in Kashmir, who had just been given this title to this region because of his role with the British government. So there are parts of the Maharaja's rule that are recognized even today by Kashmiris, because the state subject, which then became the permanent residence certificate, is what we are right now witnessing a demolition of. So
Mhm.
Kashmiris do want certain aspects of what the Maharaja. Sorry, did my internet drop over there?
I'm sorry?
Did my voice drop over there? I think my
I
internet
can
dropped
hear
out.
you very
Okay.
clearly. Yeah,
All right.
this is
So
great.
certain aspects of the Maharaja's rule live on even today. The Dogra Maharaja's rule live on even today. So the
Mhm.
state subject law after Kashmir's accession to India was converted to permanent residence law. And
Mhm.
permanent residence, the permanent residence certificate, it is a part of the constitution of Kashmir. And the reason I highlight this is because that certificate is not just a common document. It's not just something that you take as like your driving license or something. It's a constitutional document. It's a part of the constitution of Kashmir. So it assumes a lot more significance in terms of value of documentation, because it is the most intrinsic part of defining who a subject or a citizen of the state is. And for those people, once you define them as citizens or subjects or permanent residents of the state then gives them certain benefits in
Right.
terms of, for example, employment is reserved only for Kashmiris. Land is reserved only for people who are state subjects, purchase of land in Kashmir. And
Mhm.
right now, after the domicile law has been changed, if you want to get education in an admission in any educational institution in Kashmir, you need to have a domicile certificate. And if you
Mhm.
want to apply for certain jobs in Kashmir, you need to have a domicile certificate. What that does is that anyone who has the certificate will be able to apply. And if you don't, you cannot get those benefits. And in Kashmir, the state is the largest employer. See, because
Right.
of the continuous internet shutdowns, communication blockades, curfews, hartals, and the overall political turmoil, there is no real private industry in Kashmir. We have
Right.
had a fledgling private economy,
So
and that is
if I could summarize this, is this accurate to say that the membership regime of the Kashmiri people in the Indian occupied Kashmir was actually regulated and controlled by the indigenous Kashmiris, and now that has given into the hands of a foreign Indian uh, regime? Is this
but
correct to
it has
summarize?
always been. partially accurate, because see, it has always been in the hands of the Indian government
Mm-hmm.
since 1947.
Okay.
On paper, Indian government only has access to defense, communications, and foreign affairs, but that is on paper. But over the course of the last 7 decades, almost every aspect of the Indian constitution has been extended to Kashmir.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 97 entries in the union list, 94 are already applicable to Kashmir. And whatever little is left is already in pari materia, which means it doesn't need to be extended. Similarly, with all the articles of the Indian Constitution. So Article 370 had already been hollowed out so much that
Right.
this was the only thing left in it. In fact, it's not today, but in 1964,
So
because
can you tell our viewers what are the key things that were left in terms of membership control by the indigenous Kashmiris?
well, the most important thing that was left was that only Kashmiris can buy land in Kashmir,
Right.
and all the internal structure of, say, economic regulation, of land alienation, who you can sell land to, who you can buy land from, what amount of lease can be given, who controls appointments in Kashmir, appointments to courts, appointments to various positions in Kashmir, various government bodies in Kashmir. Much of this was on paper controlled by the elected state government. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I'm stressing on paper is because these elected governments were all pro-India governments,
Right.
and they were always controlled by the center in Delhi.
Kind of like a
Any,
client relationship.
it is a client relationship, yes.
Right. Client
And
politician.
you see, every era of Kashmiri history has seen these client governments being created. Eventually, they revolt against the political leader, the leaders in New Delhi,
Mm-hmm.
because New Delhi has always had an expansionist policy.
Mm-hmm.
So when Sheikh Abdullah was dismissed and Bakshi Ghulam Ahmad was installed, New Delhi created Bakshi. They created a leader out of him, and they made him a prime minister. But when
Right.
they decided to expand beyond what Bakshi was also agreeable to, when they changed the nomenclature in Kashmir from prime minister to chief minister,
Mm-hmm.
Bakshi revolted against that, and they slapped 14 cases of corruption on him. The
Right.
same thing you see reiterating throughout Kashmiri history. They create people in Kashmir to sort of serve their interests,
Mm-hmm.
and because they have an expansionist policy, which is to completely dominate, not just merely interfere with our political process, but completely dominate it, and control everything that happens in Kashmir.
Right.
So
So
while
the last part of this domicile law that I want you to explain to the viewers is with respect to the impact on the forests and on land, because clearly land is no longer just specifically being controlled by the indigenous population. What happens to the forest lands and public
yeah,
lands?
well, so first of all, to begin with, what Kashmiris and people living outside Kashmir have to understand is that land has always been controlled by the state. Already, for example, nearly 50,000 acres of Kashmiri land is under illegal occupation of the Indian Army. And
Mm-hmm.
this term illegal occupation is not something that I'm using as rhetoric. This is something that has been used by a pro India political party, the PDP, Mehbooba Mufti's government. They said that the Indian Army is illegally occupying 50,000 acres of land. What that means is that the Indian Army has not even taken permission from these pro-India governments to take that land, to occupy that
Mm-hmm.
land. There are many houses in Kashmir, many buildings, many commercial buildings that where you see the Indian Army having their camps in. Sometimes they don't have any official contact. My own family has had a house which was not, we were not living in it at that time, and a section of a portion, some soldiers from the CRPF had come and
Mm-hmm.
taken over it, and it took us nearly 2 years to get them out of it. When they
Wow.
left, there were alcohol bottles all over the place, and it was messed up quite a lot. We had to
Mm-hmm.
renovate the whole place all over. And these things are quite they are quite common in Kashmir. That the army can come into your place, they can take what they want, and if they feel that it is justified, then you really need to put in an effort to get them out of it. Then.
Right.
So
Right.
what I'm trying to say is that the Indian Army already occupies significant control of land. The
Okay.
most prime land in Kashmir, the land that is situated at a slightly elevated position, because in Kashmir we live inside the valley, so
Right.
we live in the flat land mostly inside Srinagar especially. So most of the prime land is taken by the army camps. What is
Mhm.
left after that is what is to go around. Now, when these non-Kashmiris, when Indians start moving into Kashmir, which they already have as we speak, they have already moved in. So the demographic change has already begun to take place. When they start moving in, the only place where you can create new settlements for them is either on the state-owned land, land
Mhm.
which is owned by the state, or by engaging in deforestation. You need to clear out land for them. And the Indian government is already doing that. They're cutting down forests, they're cutting down trees. You see, in last year, I believe in November and December, while we had no government in place, while there was no urgency for anything to be done in this area, I about 125 projects were cleared in a week. That kind of efficiency isn't seen in a year. And all
Mhm.
these projects were for clearance of forest land. So these forests have been cut down. In fact, I've seen photos. Some of my friends have sent me photos from Kashmir, from various areas in Dodhpatri and other places
Right,
where
right.
the trees have been completely cut down off the hills over there.
Can
And
you
there's
tell us
no,
what the reaction of your family or friends or Kashmiris have been to such moves?
well, see, everyone is shocked and dejected. So say dejected is just it's an understatement right now. We have this has been shocking across the board. No matter what your political affiliation is, whether you are pro autonomy, whether you, even because even those governments, the people who have believed in an accession to India, the minority of Kashmiris who have worked on that, which is mostly
Mhm.
people who are connected to client governments in Kashmir,
Mhm.
even they have expressed their shock and absolute dismay at what has happened. So
Right.
across the board, and of course,
Right.
people who believe in independence, people who believe in accession to Pakistan, they will obviously say that this is a shocking move. So they will obviously
Right.
reject it. But
Right.
what I'm trying to say is that irrespective of the various forms of political opinion that we have in Kashmir, there's a unanimous rejection of what they have done. Even
Right.
Jammu and Ladakh, which have been marketed, the propaganda is that they're accepting of this move. Even they have rejected it because they
Right.
see that
And
their
how do we
land
know
rights.
they've rejected it? Because obviously there's been this communication blockade that was going on, that in some fashion is still going on. What are the different ways we can tell that they're in opposition?
Well, there is free open communication going on right now. The internet is also working more or less. They don't have 4G
Right.
internet, but internet at home is working fine. So we can
Yeah.
communicate with people. And Kashmiri Pandits have also filed litigation in the Supreme Court of India.
Right.
A group of them has filed. They've
Because
spoken
it
up.
seems like the mainstream Indian media is pushing out a very different narrative,
Yes,
as opposed to
as
what you're telling me, right?
well as that's their job because they have to build an ecosystem of misinformation. So they'll feed that information that is not for consumption of people like us. That
Right.
information is for consumption of Indians, to tell
Right.
them that look, this is benefiting women in Kashmir. They didn't have a right to property, which
Hmm.
is an absolute lie. They will tell them
Right.
that LGBTQ community was criminalized in Kashmir, which is a lie again.
Right.
Or they'll tell them that Kashmir was a monopoly of certain families, without
Right.
telling them that those people had been cultivated by India itself.
Right.
So this is an ecosystem of misinformation that has
Right. So
been
it seems
created.
like it's a nationalist media working for the state. I
Yes,
mean, Doordarshan is funded by the state. That's one of the media networks
uh,
that's been.
I would you'll be
It's a
hard pressed
it's a
to
mouthpiece.
find you'll be hard pressed to find any media organization, any mainstream media organization in India right now, which is not a mouthpiece of the
Hmm.
government. The
That's
ones
right.
that don't want to be mouthpieces have been suppressed into becoming mouthpieces. At the
Hmm.
very least, they will not be heavily critical of the government. They won't say something positive about them, but maybe, for example, maybe NDTV might not say something which is absolutely positive the way Republic TV would say about the BJP government. But they will not. They will also shy from being properly critical, especially
Hmm.
on Kashmir. Because when it comes to Kashmir, even the most liberal of Indians will at best talk about human rights violations. They see Kashmir, they don't see anything wrong in denying us our political will, as
Hmm.
long as human rights violations don't occur in Kashmir. So that is the
Right.
extent of imagination that these groups can go to. And
Hmm.
Kashmir is not an issue of human rights violations. There are human rights violations that take place in Kashmir, but they're taking place because you're denying people's political will. So essentially, to classify Kashmir as an issue of human rights is again a part of that misinformation campaign.
Yeah. While we're on the subject of the presence of the occupying forces of the Indian state in Kashmir, let's also talk about the way the Indian government has introduced a new set of policies that allows the intensification of the settler colonial presence of the military. I'm referring to the cantonment areas. Tell our viewers what the new policy is that was introduced and what are the intentions behind the policy, what's the impact going to be?
You see, the Indian government is right now trying to solidify its control in Kashmir, and they will gain control over construction, planning, building new structures for their army, the CRPF, the BSF, and these have been very many. These have been long-standing demands of the Indian armed forces. They want to have areas where they can have their families. They want to have areas where soldiers who have served many years in Kashmir can retire in, and that this is what is being built in Kashmir. There will be colonies that will be created, which will be made either inside the big camps. For example, there's a very big army, there's a very big CRPF camp in Karnagar. It's one of the largest ones in Srinagar. There are many others similar to that. So these camps are built over a vast amount of land, and they can create a structure for residence of the families of these soldiers inside those camps or very close to them. That is something that we are not exactly sure of how it will take place. But recently, the CRPF and the Indian Armed Forces, they have been going to people, giving them notices, asking them to sell their property, asking them if they're interested in selling their property. And this is because now the paramilitary forces want to take full control of the property that they have. They want to do it legally. But what needs to be understood is that this is just a de jure legitimization of something that is already de facto. To simplify that, what I mean
So
is,
they're legalizing it even though it's illegal.
no, what I'm trying to say is that they're legalizing something which is already happening in fact. So in fact, when you assess, the Indian Army already controls land
Right,
in
okay.
Kashmir. But
So this
now
has
they're
been
just getting
going
the
on
legal.
already, but they're
Yes,
just putting
but
it down in the book.
until now, say even the Mehbooba Mufti government could call this an illegal occupation of land. And the member, because they haven't taken permission for taking that land, but now it is being legalized. So even that, just to meet the letter of the law, they are showing that they have followed process. They've asked people to sell their land without actually saying that this is not a mere request to sell land. When the army makes a request, it comes with a certain weight and threat. So that is what is concerning in Kashmir. But what is of more concern, politically speaking, is that the demographic change that will take place when these structures are built, when the soldiers and their families move in. Because you see, these people are not just coming in and going to remain idle. They will get voting rights because once they become domiciles of Kashmir, let's imagine 10 years down the line, 15, 20, 30 years down the line, their children will have become a part of our economic structure. They will be a part of our societal structure as well. At that point of time, if there's a referendum on Kashmir, how will these people be kicked out of Kashmir then? Because it creates a new legal debate about the rights of the children of these settlers, and that complicates the situation. Because say
Right.
if a million
Mirza, can
non-Kashmiris
I
move,
ask you, do you see a parallel between the policy that the Israeli state has used with respect to Palestine and what is happening between India and Kashmir?
yes, there are shocking parallels, but before I delve into them, I feel it's very important to say that we cannot compare oppressions because what's happening in
Right, of
Kashmir
course.
has to be assessed in its own plane. What's happening in Palestine has to be assessed in its own plane. And often, as Kashmiris, we draw inspiration from similar struggles elsewhere in the world, and we end up comparing our oppression to their oppression without understanding that in some cases the oppression that we are facing is quite unique. It is unparalleled, in fact, in
Right.
many senses. And one example I can give you of that is that the Israeli courts have charged their prime minister with corruption. He is going to face trial even though he's the prime minister. Something like that can never happen in India. no court is ever going to charge a sitting prime minister, and most of all, a prime minister like the one India has right now, with corruption or something which is going to be harmful, detrimental to that prime minister's image. So what we are going through is something quite unique, and it has to be assessed in its own, on its own plane. But we have to learn from how other communities have dealt with similar forms of onslaught, because our
Right.
oppressors are learning from each other. They are taking notes and they are sharing their experiences. Now, and with regards to your question, there is a legal parallel to what is happening in Kashmir and what has been happening in Palestine, because Israel uses three criteria to revoke the citizenship of Palestinians who are deemed to have breached these provisions. The first is that if they have lived abroad for an extended period of time, then they lose their residency rights. So if this has not happened in Kashmir right now, so I don't mean to be alarmist, but I'm just highlighting what has happened elsewhere. This is possible that it can be replicated. And the Indian government seems to be moving in that direction. So if Kashmiris tomorrow live for a very extended period of time abroad, you might be asked to re-establish your right of citizenship, your right of domicile in Kashmir. The second is based on a 1995 High Court judgment by an Israeli court, under which the logic used by the court was that Palestinians need to establish that their center of life is in Jerusalem in order to maintain residency rights. So you have to show that you're connected to Jerusalem in some way. And if you cannot establish that, then you lose your right of citizenship, your residency rights. And the final one, which is the most perturbing, is that they have, if they're accused of breaching allegiance or minimum loyalty to Israel, then they will lose their residency rights. And this was done in 2006 against 4 members of Hamas who had been elected to a Palestinian legislative council. So these were elected members. This law was used against them to revoke their citizenship rights on the basis of the argument that they have breached minimum loyalty to Israel. Now, in India also, there is this argument of nationalism, wearing Indian nationalism on your sleeve. And Indians are very insistent on that. You see, if you go for a movie in India, a movie theater in India, you have to stand up for the national anthem before you watch the movie. So nationalism has been weaponized in India. And there may come a time where people of Kashmiri origin and people who are living in India who are from Kashmir, who don't express particular affection for the policies and for the
Now, do
country.
you see any similarities in terms of the settlement pattern, in terms of the settlers, in their pattern of how they establish integration and then eventually kind of a dominance,
So
which
this
they
is,
now.
yeah, this is something that I personally, in my assessment, I differ from other people who have studied this. I feel that we will not see settlement the way you see it in Israel right now. It may happen maybe 10, 15 years down the line. We cannot predict the future, but at least not right now. Because right now, it looks, even the Pandit groups that are asking for a return to Kashmir, they are not asking for Kashmiri Muslims to be kicked out of their homes. At least that's not the official demand. There may be, the latent discourse around it seems to be centered around that. That's the kind of rhetoric that is used. But the official demand is for creating a separate colony for them. And that's what was being discussed between 2010 to 2015. It is what the Hurriyat had also opposed, because they did not want to create separate colonies for Kashmiri Pandits. They wanted Kashmiri Pandits to come back and live amongst society instead of, polarizing society into religious divides, that one colony is a Hindu colony, one colony is a Muslim colony. That is what they were opposing. But that is the demand right now. So, so I do think that there will be such settlements created which are separate,
Right.
and they will be
What is the
guarded by
fear,
military.
if I may, what is the fear around changes to demographic profile of the valley with the intensification of the Indian military
Yeah.
presence and their housing and the domicile law?
Yes. So, see, there are three categories that have been created by the Indian government. One is, if you have lived in Kashmir for 15 years, you can get a domicile. If you have lived in Kashmir for 7 years, studied in Kashmir for 7 years, and you've passed 10th grade and 12th grade from Kashmir, you can get a domicile. Or if you've worked in Kashmir under the Indian government for 10 years, then you and your children are eligible for a domicile certificate. Now, if I look at just one of these categories, which is the 15-year category, that's the highest bar, the highest eligibility criteria, if you have lived for 15 years in Kashmir. Under that category, nearly 1.5 million non-Kashmiris are eligible to get domicile status. The 1.5 million is nearly 14% of Kashmir's population, because our total population is about 12 million people. So that's nearly 14% of our population, just in one category if they all apply. I'm not even counting all the armed forces personnel whose children will become eligible, all the bureaucrats, the IAS, IPS officer, IFS officers. I'm not counting the people who will be eligible under the 7-year category, the 10-year category. I'm just talking about one category. I'm not even counting the migrant, because West Pakistan refugees will also become eligible. They also, people registered as migrants in Kashmir, they're also eligible. So I'm not counting all of those. Just one category eligibility is at 1.5 million people. That can potentially cause a change of 13 to 14% of our population. It's a massive, massive change. In the first week after this law was passed, 33,000 certificates were issued. And as we speak, certificates are being issued every single day, because now the process is online. You can apply for the domicile certificate online and you can get it online. So the data has not been released on how many have been given as on date. But in the first few days itself, 33,000 had been issued. The second and the third day, another 5,000 were being issued. So that's a very significant number of people
Do
that are
we
being
know
added.
the data comparatively for Ladakh, Jammu, and Kashmir?
But the law, this is the interesting bit. The law has not been extended to Ladakh. The domicile law has only been extended to the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, because Ladakh right now is a separate union territory. And in fact, this is a question I've not answered in any of the discussions I've had till now. But this is it's very good that you asked this, because you see, Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir, until August of last year, was one unit. It was one state. And now they have divided these into two separate states, two separate union territories. And most of all these changes that are taking place on domicile, on mining rights, on demographic possibility of demographic change, it is all geared only in Kashmir. And the argument, in my view, is that this is to control the Kashmiri Muslim population, so that the demography is changed just so slightly. And if you have enough people coming in from India into Kashmir, because you see, most of the Kashmiri population boycotts elections. So if you have a significant population coming in from outside, they become a very powerful vote bank. They become a vote share. And then these people will legitimize through elections things that are taking place. If there's a controversy, they can just say, okay, fine, we'll have an election for that. We'll make this an election issue. And if the party that supports this issue wins, that means it has been legitimized by a popular vote of the people, which is not accurate. And our other fear is that tomorrow, if there's a referendum, who will get to vote in that?
Thank you for watching and listening. We would love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts in the comments, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. We also provide a link to our website and a donations page. Help us keep this show going and growing through your financial contributions. And take care.